Just gonna have to have a little faith in the old autofocus. Let's just get. So I'd like to talk about what productivity looks like for a person with a certain set of cognitive dysfunctions. I experience executive dysfunction, so I have difficulty initiating and staying on tasks. I experience generally low object permanence, so if I'm not looking at something, there's a good chance it just winks out of existence as far as my brain is concerned. And I also experience very poor adherence to structure kind of because of the foregoing. And that leads to a lot of difficulty in being productive in what I would call unstructured free time. I'm very fortunate in that for whatever reason, my brain has made an exception for things that directly pay the bills, buy the groceries, pay the rent, etc. So I show up to work. I'm able to consistently do the things that I need to do and whatever is categorized as job. But when I am left to my own devices with unstructured free time and I want to do something cool, productive, uh, I very often will just slip into sort of a state of lassitude where I'm bouncing back and forth between sort of trivial activities and not really getting stuck into the things that I want to do. Um, and sort of at the beginning of my adult life, when I finished college, I was both pretty miserable and very unproductive. Um, and I made what I contend is the rational decision to focus on the being miserable part first. And so I spent about a year living in a Buddhist monastic community, and then a couple of years thereafter, just sort of, moved back to the city, got a job in a coffee shop, and just, okay, if I'm paying bills and doing normal stresses and whatnot, does this stuff that I learned up there in the mountains actually work? And it does. And so I'm happy to report that I am a happy person. I enjoy life, but I'm still not a particularly productive person. And I sort of like hoped that when I got my well-being in order, the productivity would naturally follow, just because the experience of productivity for me was one of two modes. I was either hyper-focused on something I was curious about, or I was just in such a tremendous fear of failure that I would frantically get a whole bunch done. Um, in college, it wasn't uncommon for me to do 6 weeks of work for a course overnight. Which is bad. Don't do that. You may get the work done, but it's absolutely devastating to your mental health and well-being. Um, and so I thought, okay, if I get the mental health and well-being sorted out, maybe I'll find my way into a mode of productivity that isn't so distressing. But that arrow didn't go both ways. The productivity was distressing, but alleviating the distress didn't actually lead to any kind of productivity. And while it only took me a couple of years to get happy, it actually took me about a decade to get productive, which was not how I expected that to go at all. What I've come to realize is that I really need structure, despite the fact that my brain seems to recoil from structure sort of immediately. I need it. And the problem that I have had with structure is not structure itself. It's actually that all of the structures that I had tried implicitly carried the assumption that if you're unorganized, then you must get organized, and then that will lead to productivity. And I'm not saying that that doesn't work for some people, but it definitely doesn't work for me. For whatever reason, my brain pulls from a shared pool of resources to perform the tasks of organization or task initiation or staying on a task that's already been initiated. All three of those things are pulling from the same pool. So if I spend the resources to be organized, I don't actually have the resources to then initiate a task or stay on a task once it's been initiated. So for me, because of that, organization is actually worse than useless. It is an active harm to my total output to attempt at the outset to organize my efforts. And what I came to realize was productivity and organization are orthogonal. They are just pointing in different directions. And so increasing your level of organization doesn't necessarily increase your level of productivity. And it's perfectly possible to be very organized and staggeringly unproductive. Trust me, I'm an expert in this. But that also opens the door to another possibility, which is to be both unorganized and productive. And I like to call this chaotic productivity. So what is chaotic productivity about, in my understanding of it? Uh, it means allowing the process of productive output to be inexplicable during all of the interim states. So I very often simply don't have an explanation for why I'm doing things in the sequence that I'm doing. Why am I focusing on this instead of that? I don't know. But if I allow it to unfold without interference, stuff gets done. Um, Really, quite a lot of stuff gets done. When I get out of the way of my mind's natural processes, I'm very productive. What I'm effectively doing is following the path of least resistance within my own mind. So given a set of goals and desired outcomes, letting my mind tackle the problem of how to achieve that without imposing any sort of externally derived structure on it. And ultimately, what that means is trusting in my unconscious faculties to achieve the desired result. I have had the experience that, for whatever reason, um, the process which decides on the most efficient, effective deployment of my resources is just unconscious in my brain. It's not a thing that routes in any way through my verbal processes, so I don't hear like words explaining what's going to happen. And in the same way that basically all human competence is unconscious, you learn to drive a car, for example, in that first lesson, you're at 10 and 2 and you're death gripping the wheel. And then in subsequent lessons, and then, 3 weeks later, when you're out on the road on your own, you're just casually driving from point A to point B, but you're not thinking about how far do I push in the gas pedal and where's the brake pedal, and you just do the thing. My brain will do the thing of finding a path to the desired outcome that minimizes my stress level without any conscious process. And so I need to let it do the thing. So that's chaotic productivity. But I do need structure. I just need structure that works for my brain. And so through trial and error, I've come up with 4 principles for what structure looks like for me. So it needs to be unorganized so that I'm not wasting those resources that I'm going to need to initiate and stay on tasks. It needs to be small in scale so that I don't run the risk of kind of being overwhelmed with information when I approach the structure, because that's a stressful and negative experience that's going to cause me to not adhere to the structure. It needs to be simple, because if there are multiple steps between seeking out the structure and getting the information that I need, I'm going to probably go off the rails. And it needs to be discoverable, because I'm likely to forget that it's there. So it needs to be in the spaces that I traffic in some way that I can go, oh, yes, that's the thing. That's the thing that helps me do the things. In response to those 4 considerations, I came up with 2 pieces of structure. The first is a mantra. Just do the next thing. Those 4 words are a key unblocker for me, because it's very small scale and it's simple, and I can just chant it to myself when I am down in the bottom of the pit of lassitude. If I'm laying in bed and the possibility of doing anything seems terribly remote, I can chant, do the next thing, do the next thing, do the next thing, do the next thing, again and again and again, until inevitably it occurs to me that, like, crossing the room and looking uh, at my repository of intent is a next thing that's possible for me, and then I can, walk, crawl, flop dramatically across the floor and arrive at my second piece of structure, which is my next thing board. And the next thing board is just a small whiteboard that I attach to the wall next to my computer, that every day, ideally in the morning, but whenever I happen to get there, I go and write down everything that I can think of that would be cool to do that day. Um, and on screen is the results of my first day of doing this exact process that I'm describing to you. This was an iterative process. I went through a whole bunch of different efforts and different levels of organization and structure before I realized I just got to find my way down to the very bottom of the organizational axis. And when I finally got this particular structure nailed in, it was a tremendous success just immediately. And you can see from the volume of chores that are on this board that things had not been going well in the immediate past. But I got a ton done. And just a couple of notes on the board. You may notice that breakfast, lunch, and dinner are on the board. And I could have put them together in a nice, sensible, neat, contiguous way, but that's not how they occurred to me, so I didn't do that. Um, and I didn't go back and fix that because no editing is allowed on the board. That's a major avenue of potential stress, and we're just eliminating that by not caring about it. Um, Sometimes I have tasks that I repeat several times throughout the day, and sometimes I will like make little tally marks. Um, to track that, or sometimes I will have already crossed it out because I didn't realize I was going to repeat it over the course of the day, and so I just make a new entry and it's fine. Um, Again, no editing, no stressing. Not only chores go on the board, so anything that I intend to do goes on the board, and if that means that I'm going to go climbing or go visit some friends or just play video games all night, that's fine because I'm not making judgments about my intent here. I'm just trying to document my intent and then provide the structures that allow my intent to be affected by my effort. So, no judgments about what goes on the board, just document everything that goes on the board. And there's no requirement of temporal consistency. I don't have to put something on the board before I go out and do the thing to get credit for doing the thing on the board. When I am attempting to go out into the world and be a productive person, if I get sidetracked by the discovery that there's some other thing that I can be doing, fine, finish it, go back to the board, write it down, cross it off, get the little dopamine hit, feel good chemicals in the brain, life is good, the board is working. Just some tips if you want to try out the board. I found that it was very helpful for me to have a designated special place for long-term information, doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, jury duty. Um, I actually went to jury duty for the first time in my life due to the advent of the board, which was very exciting because I'm pretty sure eventually they throw you to jail if you just keep forgetting about it. Uh, Fingers crossed there's no warrants out for me. I found it helpful to make my first entry of the day be on the board so that I immediately can cross it out winning. And it just everything counts. It's just if you did a thing and it's a thing that you intended to do or was productive or it lowered your stress level or in general reduced the overall chaos of your life, write it down, cross it off. And now I can hear my fellow space cadets objecting, okay, that sounds great. You've got this wonderful structure that's reducing stress in your life by storing all of your intended activities and allowing you to compare that to what you actually do. But that's gonna be great for the 3 days that I look at it, and then I'll never consider it again. And of course, you're 100% correct. And I've had that experience with many, many forms of structure. But my hypothesis, which has been confirmed, was that the lack of adherence was due to the stress that arises from asking my brain to do a task which was unsuited to. It was the organization, not the structure, that was the problem. And so I hoped that I could train myself to actually seek out the structure because it is a desirable and pleasant experience. And I kind of borrowed an idea from dog training. So if you're working with an untrained dog, the first task that you have is to train that dog to respond to its name by paying attention to the trainer. So you need to make sure that every time the dog hears its name, that's a pleasant interaction. The dog hears its name, pays attention to the trainer, gets a treat, right? Hear the name, pay attention to the trainer, get a treat. And if you repeat that over and over and over, you wire the dog's reward centers to associate hearing the name with receiving a reward. And so then at that point, they seek out, oh, I've heard the name, let me go pay attention. It's time to get the reward. And that's the fundamental enabler for all subsequent training. And that's what I wanted to do to myself because I flatter myself that I am at least as trainable as the average dog. And this has been borne out, fortunately. That just highlights that all board interaction needs to be positive. So I stopped writing dates on the top of my board because I found myself sort of ruminating on, oh, the last time I made it here was 3 days ago. I'm such a failure. I celebrate every time I arrive at the board. So if the first time I get to the board is 10 o'clock at night and I go, oh, where have I been all day? It's, oh, hey, I've got a couple hours left. Awesome. What have I done today? Right? Let's give myself the credit for what I've done today and make the celebration of what I've done today focused on the board so that I want to come back here. I try to take time at the end of the day, which may or may not be the first time that I get there, to actually reflect on my successes of the day. Usually, I've done at least some things. And so at the end of the day, if I can reflect upon, here are the things that I've done. I had these intentions. I realized these intentions. This structure has helped me to realize these intentions. My stress level is going down. My overall satisfaction with the output of my life is going up. All of those things bring about positive chemicals in the brain that make me want to seek the structure out more in the future. And I'm happy to report that this training has worked. I've actually been successful in training myself to seek out this structure and ultimately other structures. At this stage, my next thing board is retired. I've actually moved on to sort of more sophisticated and involved structures because I can trust myself to seek out structures that have a little bit more complexity and not get derailed because my brain wants the structure. It wants to access the information about what it is that I intend to be doing. And that's a revelation in my life. And being able to create more complicated structures enables me to set more complicated intentions and see them through. And, ultimately, practicing with the next thing board lowered my stress level, increased my output, and made me genuinely excited about the possibilities of introducing structures to my life that help me by working with the way that my brain works. That has been a fabulous improvement. And it's really underlined the fact that structure was never the problem. Organization, for me, was the problem because I was asking my brain to do something as a prerequisite to productivity that it was fundamentally unsuited to do. And it quite reasonably completely rejected that prospect. Unfortunately, brains, being squishy meat computers, don't have handy error messages that tell you why things have failed, and so you have to do the work to figure it out. Now, if you follow this path and you use the next thing board or something similar, doesn't have to be the same. What works for you, even if you have similar challenges, might be different from what works for me. But if you follow this path, what you have to contend with subsequently is the dynamics of the chaotic mind in productive action. Because in addition to living down in the sea of lassitude, you can fly too high and get too close to the sun. You can reenact the flight of Icarus through productivity and find yourself crashing back into the sea of lassitude. So managing the dynamics of the productive chaotic mind is a topic for the next video.